This is not a very formal presentation. What we really want is to have you have a chance to figure out what's happened upstream in the Putah Creek and now what's happening downstream in the creek. So what we'll talk about today is a little bit of introductions to Putah Creek itself, and the executive director and a board member from Putah Creek Council will be doing those. And Turit is also a member of the local Putah Creek Coordinating Committee, as well as on the Putah Creek Council. And Phil is the executive director of Putah Creek Council. So we'll hear a little bit about that background. Then we'll hear from Max Stevenson, who is the Putah Creek stream keeper. That's one of the provisions that we got from the accord, is having a Putah Creek stream keeper. He'll go over just a little bit about what's downstream, focusing you from the wonderful restoration that's happened upstream to moving downstream and the opportunities downstream. Then you'll have a chance to hear from a panel. We don't have presentations from this panel. We want you to ask questions. We want you to look at the resource conservation districts and the farmers who are working in Putah Creek. Geoff Klein, who's the Bullseye Farm irrigation Garrett's manager, Garrett Spann, who's in the Yellow Bypass, and Phil Stevens, again from Putah Creek Council, asking them questions about what are the opportunities downstream and how does downstream of the Putah Creek work, and how might different opportunities be taken advantage of as you move forward. So think of all your questions, because there's a pretty diverse group of people who have different toes in the water in Putah Creek to ask your questions. So if that's okay, when we get to 1:15, I'll just either ask you to raise your hand with the button at the bottom of your screen, or to put your questions in the chat. If you put your questions in the chat right now, we'll keep track of them and we'll go back to them when we get to that 1:15 session. So I'm hoping that's good for all of you. We're not going to introduce people since there's 32 people in the room, but it looks like a great cross-section of people who are interested in Putah Creek and what can be achieved in Putah Creek. So again, the goal of the meeting is to hear about the Putah Creek water system, understand water users' perspectives from agriculture, fish, wildlife, and conservation, and share how the Putah Creek Water Management Initiative is working to improve the creek.
This is Turit Reed, and as Juliana has already said, I'm a member of the board of Putah Creek Council, and I'm also the Putah Creek Council representative on the Lower Putah Creek Coordinating Committee, which we also call LPCCC. Anyway, here's a slide that shows you the bit of Putah Creek that we call Lower Putah Creek. Putah Creek actually originates on Cobb Mountain, which is way to the north. It flows through what is now Lake Berryessa. Then it has a bit of its freedom, and then it ends up by being stored in Lake Solano. And from the end of Lake Solano, we have what we call the diversion dam. And that's the point where water is diverted to Solano County and also is allowed to continue as Putah Creek. So Putah Creek is something like about, what, 32 miles? Is that right, Max? At least the bit that we're going to look at. And so we've got the, and we'll look at the next picture, which will show you the difference between what we call, here's a bit upstream of Winters. And, you know, this is the Putah Creek that we love. It's the bit that the fish love, people love, the beavers love. And then we can see what it looks like a little bit downstream. This is the bit that the fish don't care for as much, but it has got water. This photo showing a time when it's just below what's called the Los Rios check dam. And the beaver don't love it that much. People don't love it that much, at least not for recreation. So it's quite a lot different downstream, channelized, an agricultural canal in many ways.
Hi, I'm Phil Stevens. I'm the executive director of Putah Creek Council. And I'm going to give you a little bit of history of what's gone on Putah Creek since the 80s. In 1988, a group of people who were affiliated with Davis Audubon got together and decided that they needed to do something about Putah Creek because it was mostly being used as a garbage dump for the landowners along the creek. And so that was the initial impetus for the founding of Putah Creek Council. But in 1989 and continuing on into the early 90s, those were drought years, and much of the stream dried up. As Turid would say, the beavers didn't like that, the fish didn't like that, and the people didn't like that either.
So here we have what happened as a result of this lawsuit, which was brought by Putah Creek Council in conjunction with UC Davis and the city of Davis. And the result was this accord, which established environmental flows so that the fish can continue to thrive from January through to December. We had pulse flows for the salmon, a pulse flow being what you need to encourage the salmon to swim upstream and spawn in the gravel of the stream further up, closer to winters. It also established the Lower Putah Creek Coordinating Committee. And this is a group of people that's made up of 10 members. Half of them are on the Yolo side, because remember, Putah Creek separates Yolo County from Salina County for much of its flow in this lower section. So we have 5 members from the Yolo side, which includes the City of Davis, Putah Creek Council, UC Davis, and 2 other members. And from the Salina side, we have the Salina County Water Agency, the Salina Irrigation District, and members from Main Prairie Water District and the cities of Vacaville, Fairfield, Vallejo, and Sassoon City. So 5 from Yolo, 5 from Salina. And then we also have the streamkeeper position, which was established so that there was a person who had oversight over flows, restoration, habitat use, and basically it gave a framework for how Putah Creek could be managed.
Well, we've already introduced ourselves. Putah Creek Council manages 3 separate programs at this point. We have an education program, a stewardship program, and we operate a native plant nursery. And one of the primary objectives of all of these programs is to bring people into contact with nature. That's the most bang for your buck in terms of habitat protection that you can possibly get. If people spend time with nature, learn to love it, then you've got people who will stand up and help defend it. So that's much of what Putah Creek Council is trying to do, is to bring people and nature together along the creek.
So we'll turn it over to Max now, who can tell us a little bit more about Putah Creek background. Thanks, Max.
Yeah, next slide, please. Hi, I'm Max Stevenson. I'm the Putah Creek Streamkeeper. I'm an employee of the Solano County Water Agency, but I'm lucky enough to have 2 bosses. I also answer to the Lower Putah Creek Coordinating Committee. Upstream near Winters, we've got the Winters Putah Creek Nature Park. It's not in Davis, but we've got thousands of salmon spawning. We have around $25 million in restoration projects completed in the past 24 years. We have this amazing community of farmers and landowners and agencies that are working together on the creek, sharing pretty much the same goals. Next, please. So if you look upstream near Winters, that's where all the salmon spawn. The salmon come up from the ocean through the tow drain. So they swim up the tow drain down here towards Rio Vista, come all the way up, hang a left at the Los Rios check dam, and come all the way up Putah Creek. But even though we've had thousands of salmon coming up, sometimes the creek still goes dry. And this is a picture from last fall during the salmon run. And nobody wants this to happen. There's no fight over this. This was a coordination issue. In a couple days, we had more water down there, and fixed it. But there's continued opportunities for coordination and working together on managing Putah Creek for its multiple uses. So these multiple uses is what I want to give a little background on before we go to our panel. Next, please. Putah Creek Downstream. Okay, so since the Accord, we've got these rules for managing the flow in Putah Creek. The water in Putah Creek has a certain number of rules, and we have 3 locations where there's a minimum flow requirement from the Accord. So upstream at PDD, or Putah Diversion Dam, that's where Solano County Water Agency releases the water into Putah Creek. Halfway down at I-80, and then at the bottom where Putah Creek enters the tow drain, there's also another minimum flow compliance report point. Next slide, please. So this is the same information, but in graphic form. It's the 3 locations. So there's 3 lines. We've got a calendar along the bottom, just the months of the year, January through December. And then up and down on the left side is the CFS, cubic feet per second. So 5 or 10 CFS, you might be able to hop across yourself on your feet. You know, maybe at 10 or 15 CFS, you could float a canoe, or 30 CFS. So these are relatively modest flows. So the blue line is the amount that's required according to the Accord to be released into Putah Creek. Sometimes more is released, but this is the minimum amount. So for example, in June and July, we need to release 43 CFS into Putah Creek as a minimum. We need to have in July a minimum of 15 CFS showing up at I-80, this orange dotted line. And then for a few weeks in the spring and the fall, we need, in the green dotted line, we need 5 CFS. Okay, next, please. Oh, so, you know, moving downstream, this is near 106A. This is a road crossing, a private farm crossing. These 2 pipes here is where Putah Creek goes through. And this was a problem for fish passage. The salmon at times can get around this when the road is flooded and the water comes over the road. But when the road is operating, the fish can't get through here. It's too high of a jump. So next slide. We just talked to the landowner and the farmer and said, hey, would you mind working with us and putting in a lower pipe? So over on the left-hand side here, you see this smaller black plastic pipe. That's a fish passage pipe that the farmer put in for us just for fish passage for no other reason. And you know, how do you do that? Well, we talked to the fish passage engineers at CDFW, and they told us how to design it, how to set it. And when we first installed it, and there are boards on the other side during the salmon run, when we pulled the boards, the first hour in operation, 64 adult king salmon swam through that pipe one after the other. Boom, 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 boom. We know it works, and these are, you know, simple things that we're doing on the creek. Next. I'm taking too much time here. Oh, so this is the Los Rios check dam, which we've talked about. Now, this is in the Yolo Bypass Wildlife Area. The wildlife area is a great example of a working landscape. Half of it's in agriculture. You know, ag has great habitat benefits. You know, in the 90s, when we stopped burning rice and started flooding rice, it was a boon for the Pacific Flyway, for ducks, migratory waterfowl. Sort of the same thing is happening today. We're finding that these working landscapes, the flooded rice habitat and others, is good for salmon too. In any case, in this picture, just to show you what it looks like, there's salmon swimming through this structure in the picture. They're coming. This is during the season. You can't see them because the water's a little murky, but this is an example of a working landscape. Oh, and again, so this is just like an upstream downstream comparison. I think we have this. Oh, could you say an upstream, please? So in the upstream, this is an image of Putah Creek in a lot of people's minds about, you know, the calendar photo, the large quantities of cold water. Most of this water in Putah Creek is going towards users of the Solano project. And this is where the cold water is. This is where a lot of the attention has been held and the money for restoration dollars. And it's really worked. The salmon are coming back by the thousands. We've got increased public access and park access. But then moving downstream, so this is in the wildlife area. Again, this is public land too, and it's mostly used as habitat for a huge hunting resource for the duck hunters. It's also farming, which has huge habitat benefits. And you know, a lot of people, you know, the bird watchers or whoever, the fly fishers upstream maybe aren't getting down here to see And that's why we wanted to show these pictures today and introduce you to some of the land managers, landowners, farmers that are on our panel coming up. And this is one other point. So the city on the left is Davis, and you can see Highway 80 going across. And then there's a label for the Yolo Bypass Wildlife Area, which is in green there. And then Putah Creek is labeled with these mile marker numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then -1, -2, some engineer invented that system in the 40s. What the red arrows represent are the flow of water. So water sometimes flows downhill, but at other times of the year, water flows uphill. There's an anti-gravity field around the wildlife area. No, there's a lot of pumps, and the channel for Putah Creek is also used for wheeling. This is a historic use. It's a legal use. It's has benefits for habitat. But when we're trying to share the flows and the fish passage between ag irrigation wheeling, moving water around, and pumping and fish passage, we need to, there's opportunities for better coordination. So that's what we're working on today. We've got an engaged community that is talking and working through these things. And you know, we have a lot of meetings. So next, please. Oh yeah, and then the habitat in the wildlife area itself, this is almost 17,000 acres of, again, like working landscapes. It's almost half, you know, Garrett Spann, I think, is here. He's the manager of this area. And they've got agricultural leases that are managed to benefit, you know, the ag operations, growing rice for the most part, and some cattle grazing, but also for duck habitat and migratory bird habitat. And the bottom 3 miles of Putah Creek goes through the wildlife area. And a lot of the wetlands historically, you know, from 100 years ago, that was the terminus of the Putah Creek. It was called the Putah Creek Sinks on all the old maps. And, you know, they're one of our main partners. And yeah, we're working on Putah Creek together.
Thanks so much. So let me just check that everybody can participate. So if you want to put a question in the chat, go to the bottom of your screen and you'll see a place where it says chat. If you want to raise your hand, go to the bottom of your screen, like this shows here, how to raise your hand. You have to hit more on my screen, and then it'll give you all these choices to raise hand. So raise your hand, and I'll see your hand is raised, or put a question in the chat. This is your chance. The panel speakers are Max Stevenson, the Putah Creek streamkeeper, Kelly Huff, the district manager from the Dixon Resource Conservation District, David McGee, farmer, president of the board for Dixon RCD, Phil Stevens, who you've heard from Putah Creek Council, Jeff Klein, who's the irrigation manager at Bullseye Farm, and Garrett Spann, who's the wildlife area manager at Yellow Bypass Wildlife Area. So this is your chance to ask some questions about what's going on in the lower Putah Creek and what are some chances. So I see a question from John Fawcett. I'm glad you got that in the chat. And John says, I live on Putah Creek and I've kayaked the creek dozens of times during my last 30 years. Occasionally I've observed farmers pumping from the creek in the summer. Is this pumping allowed? Is it occurring legally? Does SQUA use Putah Creek below the diversion dam to deliver water? Okay, let me just take that first question. So can you pump in the summer?
So could I answer a couple of these questions at once? There's one before about wheeling. What's wheeling?
Sure.
Wheeling is just moving water from one point to another in a channel. So in a canal, there's delivered water, but let's say you're a farmer and you want to move your own water. You want to pump water in from a well and move it down the canal to another location. That's called wheeling. And in Putah Creek, the same thing happens. Water can be pumped in that's not from the Solano project, not from Lake Berryessa, pumped in from a well or from the tow drain from the delta, and moved around to other parcels for irrigation a mile away or on the other side of the creek. And then for as far as the legality of irrigation diversions, they are 100% illegal. They are a water right and have historic use predating the Solano project. You know, we've got documentation in the 30s and 40s and a ton in the 1960s. And there's about 20 or 25 pumps along Putah Creek that pump their their water for irrigating farmland.
Great. So the next question is pumping in the Putah Creek during kayaking. Some people have seen pumping in the summer. What's your answer to that, Max? And then I'll turn to the other people on the panel.
Yes, pumping is the irrigation season. The Solano County Water Agency is obligated to put historic water that would have normally flowed without the dam down the creek to supply riparian irrigation uses, and they do that. And there's also other requirements to supply groundwater recharge, and then with the Accord supplying water for the fish. So we kind of see it as three different customers for water in the creek. We've got ag irrigation pumpers, the landowners on the creek. We've got groundwater recharge obligations, which is the delivered water. And then now we have the fish water that's also put into Putah Creek at the Putah Diversion Dam.
Great.
And,
So just because there's pumping in the summertime, that doesn't mean that there's a problem with that. Anything you want to add from the RCDs or Bullseye Farm or YOLO Bypass? Nope.
No, I think Max actually nailed it pretty well. We do have a license. This is Jeff at Bullseye. We have a license to take that water from DWR as a riparian right.
Great.
I don't know how much more I need to elaborate on that, but yeah, it is allowed, and you know, we do it within the spec of our license.
Thanks. So the next question John asked was, does SQUA use Putah Creek water below the diversion dam to deliver water to downstream water pumpers with water intakes in the creek? If yes, how does that process work? Anybody want to answer that question?
I guess I coordinate, or I help coordinate that. Basically, we have our minimum flow requirements, and if the water levels drop below that on our flow measurement locations, we add more water. We're also working on coordinated systems so we know in advance. So farmers can call in and say, hey, we turned on, hey, we're turning off. It's kind of operating the creek like a canal where, again, there's customers that call in. The fish don't call in, but we know what they need. And yeah, we release more and less water depending on if the flow is too low, we release more. If the flow is too high, we release less.
Thanks. So Stephen McCord wanted to know if there's any updates on the lower reach, diverting the lower reach, the negative river miles, as you said in your slide, to avoid the Los Rios Dam blockage.
Maybe, I don't know, is Garrett here? I see Greg
Garrett.
Martinelli, but maybe that's his account or something.
No, Garrett's here.
Garrett's here. Yeah, maybe Garrett can answer. He knows about this.
So yeah, so we're working with Solano County Water Agency and other partners to work on Solano County Water Agency applied for a grant to implement a bypass channel around the Los Rios check dam so that we could maintain water in Putah Creek for pumping, but also allow fish passage around the check dam when the bores are still in. So we are working together as a group to find solutions to that check dam and still providing habitat for birds and agricultural water as well.
Great, thanks. So Tom Mulhart, I think I'm saying it right, was asking about stream flow measurements online for Putah Creek at the locations you described. And I can't remember if you had that or not online, Max.
Yes, we do. You can go to the SQUA website. I'm going to drop it in the chat here. It's just scwa2.com. And up on the right-hand side is monitoring, and you click there, and then you go to Putah Creek, and there's about 10 locations you can click on. A lot of it's just water levels, looking at trends, but 3 locations have the flows too, so you can look at the flows.
Great. Another question from John, which is a question that the Putah Creek Water Management Initiative has worked on this year, is measuring the wheeled water, both in and out. And is it measured? And I would add some of the thing that we've been working on is, can it be measured on wheeled water? Any way to measure that, Max?
Yeah, so pumping a pump in a pipe pumped water in a pipe is relatively easy to measure. Water flowing in an open channel is more difficult. There's no flow meter that you can stick in a open ditch, but you can measure it. And the pumping water in and out, we're working on getting more flow meters on these pump diversions, and it's just going to take some time for installation and data coordination, all that. For the amount of wheeled water, that will be more tricky. We're not sure exactly how we're going to do that. It's going to take some creative ideas from the farmers and the operators and the engineers. Yeah, so that's the PCWM project, Putah Creek Water Management, and again, a lot of meetings. And yeah, you're welcome to come to them. They're mostly public.
Great. So Michael wants to know why was the water so high this past winter and early spring? Why was the water so high in Putah Creek, I guess you mean, yeah.
So, well, it rained a lot, right? But the Lake Berryessa filled up to the very brim. Do you know the glory hole, the spillway? And so once it gets within a half a foot of the top and it isn't spilling yet, we're allowed to run the hydroelectric power plant higher to take advantage of that extra water. And so normally in the spring, the water levels would come down to, 170 CFS. But for, gosh, a whole month, it was like 400 or 500 CFS, almost 10 times the normal flow. I think that's what you're referring to. It was just this special case where the Lake Berryessa was at the tippy top of its fullness. And so we were allowed to not let it spill uncontrolled through the spillway, but go through the hydroelectric plant and generate green power.
Jeff and Garrett, what did you notice this winter with water being so high? Did that affect your operations?
Actually, yeah, there was a point I had to call Max on a Sunday and say, Max, the water is coming up. Like, if it keeps coming up, I need to pull my equipment out. Since we have equipment we move, we have to put in and out every year so it doesn't go underwater. And it got within a couple of inches of our equipment that we would have to move. And luckily he answered on a Sunday and pointed me to the website to where I could check the flows and see they were starting to come down at 80 and not have to worry about getting out there in the rain and moving some stuff around. And I'd actually like to touch on a point earlier. I don't really consider water coming down the creek as wheeling, but technically, yes, it is. And someone asked about measuring stuff in and out. And Max, I know you guys measure what you dump into the creek, and you have measurements along the way. And as farmers, we measure first, like my license requires me to report how much water we use. So we measure how much water we use, as well as, good irrigation practices. We have meters on pretty much everything. We record all the water that we use. So Max understands how much water goes into the creek and out, and then we know how much water we take out. The rest of it, we could probably chalk up to losses, but we should be able to, I think, get pretty close in terms of water put into the creek and then water that leaves and where it goes.
That's great. And Garrett, this spring and winter, were high flows problematic for you?
We had some flooding that occurred from water coming out of the banks of Putah Creek, which flooded out some of the areas on the wildlife area, but we're also at the same time, have Fremont Weir spilling. So we're flooding from the tow drain as well. So a little bit of road damage, but for the most part, we're not taking any water in the springtime. So it's just water flowing right down Putah Creek out to the tow drain, but it does impact the ability for the wildlife area to drain floodwaters off the wildlife area because it just impacts everything in the tow drain.
And Garrett, the whole wildlife area has got a flood easement on top of it, right? You can have 10 feet of water out there for months.
Yep, it's flood bypass, so that's what it's in a way is meant to do. So full water.
Great. Kate, you had a question?
Yeah, thanks. And it's easier to do this than try to type it. So thank you. First of all, I really appreciate the opportunity for this. And I think it's terrific that there's a panel with bringing so many of the different partners and perspectives together. I have two questions. The first one has to do with basically arithmetic, which is with the minimum mandated flows, and then basically how do how is it coordinated between the minimum mandated flows and then everybody who has the legal straws in the creek and is pumping out? How does it work out so that there is still water that's going down there? I mean, are people checking in terms of how much water is being pumped out, or how does that work?
That's a great question. So how does it work? Let me start with Jeff. How does that work? How do you report? How do you coordinate with other farmers and other water users? How much SQUA puts in and how much you take out?
Yeah, I give the guys over at SQUA, 2 days heads up of, hey, look, I'm going to take three feet here for X amount of time, 2 days from now. And that gives them time to release the water and get it down to where I'm going to need it. That way I don't just suck the bottom of it dry and they have to come back and say, where'd our water go or what's going on. So I coordinate with them ahead of time to make sure that, they're not going to be out of compliance for their stuff.
And Kelly, in Dixon RCD, how do you hear from your farmers how they're coordinating with folks with SQUA along the creek?
We do the exact same thing as what Jeff was talking about there. If we are pulling water out, we're going to talk to Max and tell him what's going on and give him a heads up. So it's a pretty same exact thing.
Great. Kate, does that answer your question on how the coordination works?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate it. And if I can ask one other quick question,
Sure.
which is, I know that a whole lot of coordination went in trying to figure out what happened a couple of years ago with the really low dissolved oxygen in the lower stretch of the creek. And I mean, a lot of problem solving went into that. And I'm hoping that Max and other people might be able to give an overview of kind of where we are with that and what's in place to monitor what conditions are.
Yeah, Max, maybe you can say a little bit about the dissolved oxygen and then how that affects wildlife, and then what the problem solving has been for that.
So in water, organisms consume oxygen just like we do in air, or in other, animals and plants need oxygen. When the dissolved oxygen in the water gets too low, the fish die. And October 5th, 2021, right before the salmon migration for spawning, there was a huge rainstorm. I don't know if you remember, I got like 5 inches at my house in Davis, and it was like 6 or 8 inches in 24 hours up in the hills above Vacaville. And it was a huge runoff event. It washed tons and tons of sediment and biological material, weeds, chopped plants, organic matter, leaves. Those things rot and consume oxygen and cause a dissolved oxygen crash. And this is I'm learned this recently. This is a well-known process in wetlands, that if you have a rain event in the fall in California and it washes a bunch of the organic matter into the waterway, you're going to have a dissolved oxygen crash. And a lot of wetland area managers are set up for this. They open certain gates, they flush the water out and replace it with better water with lower organic matter. The dissolved oxygen comes back, and it's a problem, but it's only a day or two. What happened, not in Putah Creek, but in the tow drain, which Putah Creek was always great, always had high dissolved oxygen, but the salmon come up the tow drain to get to Putah Creek, and this low dissolved oxygen was about a 15-mile stretch all the way down to Rio Vista, and the upper 6-8 miles, it lasted for weeks and weeks and weeks. And you drive down there in your truck, and the vultures were so fat and full that they wouldn't even fly away. They would just waddle because they were so filled with dead fish that they were eating. There were just dead fish all over the place, mostly carp and other things. But of course, all the adult salmon perished too. Although we think a couple did make it up for spawning. In any case, what the solution for that is to not have a backwater. It needs to be flushed out. A lot of the wildlife area in the tow drain is kind of a backwater during that time of year. It doesn't have a flow through, a little bit from Putah Creek, but it's mostly tidally influenced and it doesn't flush out. And so we had a plan for response to bring water down from the north through the tow drain through Wallace Weir. We didn't have to turn that on. You know, it was a huge coordination with multiple agencies, and we're just about to pull the trigger and flush out the tow drain with this extra water, basically from the Calusa Basin drain, and it fixed it by itself. It just, nature took care of it for us, and it was. But now we have alarming. I get a text on my cell phone for low dissolved oxygen in the tow drain just downstream of Putah Creek, and we don't have any official authority or like a coordinated response plan stamped by an engineer or anything, but we have a lot of people looking and a lot of people ready to help if needed. So it's a little bit ad hoc, but we're ready to respond.
Great. Thanks so much. I think Ned had a question. How will the next stage of the federal Solano project affect Putah Creek and its management?
Let me call my boss. No, but the Solano project, you know, Bake Berryessa, I'm not sure what this is referring to. We are in renewing our water licenses for the Solano project. They're in pieces, so different chunks. Some of them have been signed, some are being renewed. I don't think they're really affected. The main thing is the state water board's, the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan. In the news, it's called the unimpaired flows, or the VAs, voluntary agreements. That's extra water going into Putah Creek. Though that, you know, releasing from storage for the environment, that could have huge impacts. And yeah, right now it's in state water board hearings with lawyers, and you know, who knows what's going to happen. But there could be maybe like a 50% increase in environmental flows in the creek, or a 500% increase in flows in the creek.
Ned, was that what you were asking about? You can just unmute yourself and ask.
Yeah, I know. I'll even turn on the video. Yeah, that's wonderful. I mean, I from what I was reading, it's you know, in public press, it sounded like it could go the other way, big way. You know, that water was going to be diverted from Lake Berryessa in the next stage. But sounds like it's very optimistic.
Yeah, I think you know, either way, whatever the decision is, it'll go to court for 10 or 20 years, and then you know, we'll deal with it then.
Great. Other questions? Just raise your hand and I'll call on you. Nope, there's a long question. Oh my goodness. Okay. Let me try and read all of that in the chat. The rate of lower Putah Creek stream flow gains and losses vary both spatially and temporally. Please summarize any ongoing LPCCC field investigations of streams aquifer interactions and stream seepage rates. This is a very technical question. How are stream aquifer interactions and stream seepage rates being coordinated with Yolo and Solano County, GSAs? And my final question, I understand that the rate of lower Putah Creek stream flow gains and loses vary both spatially. Summarize any of those. Let's see. I think that's the same thing.
Well,
groundwater sustainability. Yeah.
Well,
So
Juliana,
the interaction between the two, that's a pretty big and complicated question.
but Turid just asked the same thing at one of our subcommittee meetings the other day. And
I'm sorry, it copied it twice when I pasted it. That's why.
Okay, that's why. All
Sorry,
right.
sorry
Well,
about that.
We'll answer
Sure.
twice if you want. Yeah, so there's been lots and lots of research on the surface water groundwater interactions between Putah Creek and the aquifer. So some sections gain water from groundwater upwelling, and some sections of the creek lose water, and it's variable depending on whether it's a wet or dry year and how much the creek is going. But we've got groundwater simulation models and reports and flow measurements, and there's a lot known. The main controller of flow on the creek in the variability day by day is how much is released from storage at the diversion dam and how much is pumped or put back in for wheeling from the irrigation diverters. So that's the part that we need a better handle on. The groundwater interaction stuff, we know pretty well and have had decades of confirmation flow measurements, and that's like another talk I can give on gaining and losing reaches in Putah Creek. It's quite fascinating. But the main variability that we don't understand is we understand it, we just need better coordination about what's being pumped in and out. Does that help?
Yeah, so in general, is there significant losses or gains along the creek relative to the flows in the creek?
So when the groundwater levels are lower, that means there's more losses. And when the ground levels are higher, that means that there's less losses and more gains. So upstream of Stevenson Bridge is considered the gaining reach. And so even historically, before Lake Berryessa was constructed, a lot of the creek would go dry half the time. Half the years it would be just dry gravel, no water at all, except just upstream of Stevenson Bridge. And that's because of this underground mountain range called the Plainfield Ridge, which heads north-south. So the Central Valley is filled up with alluvium, like a bathtub filled with gravel, and the groundwater goes through it. But in the middle of it, kind of along Pedrick Road, County Road 95 alignment, is this underground mountain range that acts like a dam. And so to the west, groundwater levels are about 40 feet higher than they are to the east. And there's a slow motion underground waterfall of groundwater going over the Plainfield Ridge. So those 40-foot higher groundwater levels to the west of County Road 95 or Pedrick Road create water in Putah Creek. That's the gaining reach, where water seeps out of the ground and keeps that wet. That might be in the order of 5 to 15 CFS. So it's significant. Sometimes it drops down to like 1 or 2, but it's always present historically and contributes water. The total flow in the summertime might be 20 CFS or 30 CFS or 40 CFS. So it's significant. As you head downstream, it might be, 3 or 4 CFS of losses, which take water from the creek. And so it might be between 10 and 100% of the flow.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank
We
you.
have a history question. So those of you with Putah Creek and maybe the RCD as well might know this. Did the creek first flow through Yolo before later flowing through Solano at Old Davis Road and into a ditch created by the farmers to prevent flooding? So what was the creek like before?
Well, yeah, I mean, it used to flow through what is now the Arboretum Waterway, and the locals in Davis didn't like it when they got flooded out in the winter, when the rains came and the river rose and their homes got wet. So yeah, there was this ditch dug to make sure that the water flow went through the South Fork rather than the North Fork, which was its original preferred way to reach the Sacramento bypass. But I'm sure other people can also comment on that.
Any memories? I know several of you have been farming your land for quite a while.
From what I understand, Juliana, that was in the 10s or early 20s.
Oh,
that movement occurred, where it was cut out of the original stream banks and went into a slough, which is now what we call Putah Creek, up on the western edge of the university, in that area up there. So just past Road 98, right where it starts to, where the elevations, the creek becomes more close to the standard elevations of the ground. Because
Yeah, our map slides show that if someone wants to.
Pardon me?
One of our previous slides has a map that shows it.
Yeah.
If I don't know who's controlling the slide.
and Stephen McCord says there's good histories about the flows and floods in the creek and after the gold rush tarnished streams in Sacramento Valley. Yeah, that is a really good reference, Stephen. Kate, you had your hand up?
Thanks. So this is kind of like a broad strokes question. It's something that, I mean, going back to actually the first of the PCWM meetings, Max, something that you've talked about in that context, as well as some others, about basically to have people remember that half of Lower Putah Creek is it is in this the flatter area. I mean, like what you were showing of the downstream pictures, and I don't know, almost like you're doing PR for it. Like, remember, this exists, and this is part of Putah Creek. And so I'm wondering, I mean, just with all the different partners, well, I'll back up a little bit, that one of the really cool things about Putah Creek is the patchwork of private and public land. And I'm sure then the challenge of everybody working together with that. And so I'm wondering, with all the different partners and the different perspectives, how is it that we should be keeping Lower Putah Creek in mind? I mean, is it like for Phil, is it an opportunity to bring people and nature together along the creek in a Putah Creek Council fashion? Is it more a management section? Are there restoration opportunities, or is that not the right way to be thinking about it?
Yeah, so that's a great intro for what the Putah Creek Water Management Initiative has been doing. And some of the conversations have been about what can you do, and both to improve measurement, to improve coordination, and to look at that area and see what can be improved for fish passage. So any of you who've been involved in those meetings want to jump in and contribute some ideas?
I can say a few things just from Dixon RCD perspective. I think that's been the real incentive, is to make sure that as much communication as possible is happening. And just as it does in other examples that we work with farmers on, you know, just getting everybody together at least 3 times, I think, Juliana, we've had people, farmers and landowners together, just to really talk about how it works and what everybody's doing, how you could coordinate better. And it seems like a lot of good has come out of that, a lot of light bulb moments of, you know, oh, wow, I didn't know that. That makes a big difference. Or, you know, oh, I'm doing this and I could switch it to do this if that's impacting you that way. So I think, like Max said, just a lot of meetings, but it can turn into, once the relationship is there, more regular, you know, just communication by text. Or Jay had some ideas and brainstorming when you were here of just ways you guys could all keep in contact in an efficient manner. So I think it's happening. There was a little bit of confusion and a little bit of lack of knowledge, probably both ways, of what people's struggles were and what people were using water for when, and how they could communicate better. But I think there was a lot of good that came out of just getting together at least 3 times.
Yeah. Herb, you have a comment or a question?
An observation, longtime member of the Lower Putah Creek Coordinating Committee, but also a walnut farmer way out in the west end of the creek. Farmers are the #1 stewards of the land, and water is key to that stewardship. And farmland is probably worthless if there's no water. So a big stake in the effective use of water and the preservation of water rights. Following this now for 20 years, it's been a fascinating journey, and certainly the last several interesting and I think successful moves to improve the community of humans that live and rely on and recreate adjacent to the creek. And all of these people, all of us, all the people that are on this call are part of that community. So for me, it's heartwarming and rewarding to see farmers and other people who are bringing that deeper and broader understanding of community to what's going to happen in terms of Max's comment about how do we actually manage the water in the creek, because it's going to take, I'll say, friendship. I like that idea, and coordination, right? So I'm just sharing my comments. I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks, Herb. Bill was asking about the lawsuit in the 60s against the farmers for groundwater diversion from the creek. That lawsuit wasn't actually in the 60s. That was later on. And that is the Putah Creek Accord is the result of that. And that is what we talked about earlier in terms of where the Solano County Water Agency is required to measure water in the 3 different places, and what the requirements are for water in the creek throughout from Lake Berryessa all the way to the river. So that lawsuit was settled and was the beginning of the Lower Putah Creek Coordinating Committee. And the people that you're hearing today, Jeff, Garrett, David, Kelly, the people who are working along the creek and how they're working together with the Lower Putah Creek Coordinating Committee to manage those different uses for multi-benefits.
You know, I wanted to make one comment here real quick so I farm in between Interstate 80 and Pole Line Road there. And I was unaware until I really got involved just how intricate and complicated it is east of Pole Line Road. That area out there with the wheeling, where they're doing a significant amount of wheeling going up into the old Mace Ranch, where they're bringing water from the tow drain, which is actually water from the Bay Delta that they're bringing up and wheeling around. It's very, very complicated. I'd always thought it would be pretty much water in, water out. By the time you get east of Pole Line Road, it is a son of a gun out there. This was my takeaway after learning about that out there.
Yeah, I think, David, that's one of the things I learned as well, is that when you started hearing from people about, well, this happens, you know, Garrett can tell us, you know, all the different things that happen in the Yellow Bypass, but also for the farmers there. It's really a very complex system. And of course, the whole water system in California is complex, but when you get there and, you know, stand on the banks, and for me, that's been one of the things that's been so valuable about this year is, you know, pointing and looking and saying, now what happens here? And people can say, well, on my farm, this is what happens. Jeff can say, this is what I'm doing in July, but this is what I'm doing in January. So it's really very helpful. I want to give people a last chance to say anything further. Jeff, do you have anything further that you want to add?
No, I think everyone else has kind of you know, said a lot of things for me, but it's been, I haven't been here nearly as long as some of these other people have, or been farming in that area as long, but it's been you know, but I spend most of my time other places. But the complexity, like you just said, is much more than we have ever given it credit for, and we've been working with Max and his team, and as well as the other community groups and other interested parties up and down the valley now, and all the different places that we farm. And it is much bigger and more complicated than we realize, like you just said. And it's easy to say we need to do this, but then you have to consider all the effects it has. And I think we've come a long way in a short period, even though it might not feel like it to some people. But in the past 15 years that I've been paying attention, a lot has changed. But like Max said, these litigations are going to go on for decades longer. And as much as I'd like to see better changes now, we have to kind of be mindful of, I consider every time we fix something, we break something else. And that's how it works in engineering. That's how it works in ag. That's how it works in any kind of system that you have, is when you make a change, you think it's for the better every time, but you don't really consider some of the outcomes. And we just need to be careful about what we do in a hurry. And I think everyone has put their 2 cents in to make sure that we slow down and we're moving the right direction at a reasonable speed.
Yeah. Bill Dietrich asked about the Forever California project, and that's not really a Putah Creek issue. So we'll refer you to the squad board when that has been discussed. And then in terms of farmers helping and replenishing the water table and the water basin, yes, that already happens. And there's a lot of great experiments in this area with farmers using water at a particular time to lay on their fields or in their orchards to help replenish the groundwater. So that's a really promising way forward. Garrett, anything you want to add as a last step?
Just thank you for for letting us participate, and look forward to the community and the group working forward on solving some of these problems and issues.
Great. And Kelly and David, you've spoken. Anything you want to add? Nope. Okay, let me turn it to Phil then for the last words. Just to send us out from Putah
Well,
Creek.
we see the downstream end of Putah Creek as an opportunity for collaboration with Yellow Basin Foundation, for example, and building a kind of a partnership of nonprofit organizations that cover the entire Lower Creek. So we'd like to, obviously, we're going to keep abreast of what's going on with the PCWM project, and we'll contribute as best we can. But the emphasis on moving downstream at this time, I think, is really well placed and very timely.
Great. So Ag Innovations supports the Lower Putah Creek Committee in this effort. You'll have a recording of this and a meeting summary on the Solano County Water Agency. If you go to that to SQA, you'll see where there's information about the Putah Creek Water Management Initiative. And we've tried to put as much information as we can there from all of the different activities. So you'll see this as well. And then you'll see some other things happening next year to implement some of the great ideas that we've heard from folks this year. Thank you so much, Phil and Turid, for hosting, and we'll look forward to seeing you all later.